I'm Michael Pauley, and this is Faith in Politics. On this broadcast, we range from the soul to the state as we cultivate those virtues and explore those principles that help us live well as faithful Catholics in this great land. Well, good day, everyone. I'm recording this episode from my office in the Diocese of Rapid City, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Chris Motz, who is in the studio for the Diocese of Sioux Falls. Chris, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Michael. Great to be with you.
Awesome. Well, as most of our listeners are aware, we have an election coming up on November 8th, 2022. Voters will decide races for governor, for U.S. Senate, U.S. House, and of course, the state legislature. But there are also a number of really critical issues on the ballot, and we decided to make the focus of today's broadcast on Initiated Measure 27, which is a proposal to legalize recreational marijuana in South Dakota. Last week, South Dakota's Catholic bishops released a statement in opposition to Measure 27. And for listeners who want to read that, that is available on the South Dakota Catholic Conference website. That's at sdcatholicconference.org. And if you click on the top navigation bar, click on statements, it'll be the first thing that appears. And so we encourage you to take a look at that. But the bishops cited a number of reasons for their opposition to Measure 27, impacts on mental health, impacts on education, economic impacts, and but I guess sort of the common thread that unites the bishops' different concerns about the marijuana initiative is that they all fit under the category of protecting the common good, which is obviously a core tenet of Catholic social teaching. And so today we're going to put the marijuana legalization initiative under a microscope and really analyze it closely through the lens of Catholic social teaching. And to help us explore this issue, I wanted to invite a person who has spent a great deal of time thinking about what the common good really means and how and the types of social conditions that either promote the common good or undermine it. So our guest today is Emily Leedom, Executive Director of the Lourdes Center in the Diocese of Sioux Falls. Emily, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's good to be with you and Chris.
Welcome back to Faith in Politics. We should say, coming back, way back, episode 2.
My second trip around the sun.
This is great. Welcome back. Glad
Thanks,
to hear it
guys.
again.
Yeah, I can't believe we've let 105 episodes slip by without having you back as a repeat guest. So it's been way too long. So, Emily, as you know, this program has a statewide audience. And so while I presume many people in the Diocese of Sioux Falls are familiar with you and your work, we may have a lot of listeners out here on the west side who don't know you as well. So just to start us off, maybe you could just give our listeners an introduction to yourself and the Lourdes Center and its mission.
Absolutely. Well, a special shout out to the west side of the state. We have a family cabin out in Spearfish, and I have really come to love West River, South Dakota. So it's a joy to be with all of our listeners today. Yeah, I serve as the Executive Director of the Lourdes Center, located here in the Diocese of Sioux Falls. It's a ministry of the Diocese of Sioux Falls. And I've been with the Lourdes Center for about 1.5 years, formerly known as Catholic Family Services. Wow, almost 2 years, actually. And really, our mission at the Lourdes Center is to integrate what I always say the best of the psychological sciences with an authentically Catholic vision of the human person in the service of human flourishing. So we do that through kind of a myriad of ways, through one-on-one counseling. So we have a counseling clinic that's part of our work. We also do a fair number of programs that are really oriented towards human flourishing, especially related to grief or the healing of emotional wounds, that kind of stuff, which we all carry. Whether we like it or not. And then we do a lot of education as well. So we like to travel around throughout the diocese and meet with people and, give presentations to youth or adults about various topics related to human flourishing through that Catholic lens. So I really became passionate about psychology when I was in college. I took a psychology class and just thought, man, how do people go through life not knowing this stuff? I was really fascinated by how we relate to other people and, just what it means why we think the way that we do, what it means to really be human in a lot of ways. And that class opened it up for me. And then later on pursued my master's, and now really have this heart for kind of the integration of the healing ministry in understanding how grace builds on our very nature. So that's kind of who I am and what we do. I also have a handsome hunk of humanity husband named Matt and 3 little girls.
So Emily, this word that, I mean, you repeated it several times. It's this word of flourishing that is really at the core of what the Lourdes Center does. For me, it really resonates with the work of the Catholic Conference and Faith and Politics.
Yeah.
Of course, the sign-off that we've always used from Faith and Politics is, until next time, live well. And that's what flourishing is, right? It's living well. So I want to just talk a little bit about what legalized commercial adult use marijuana means for human flourishing. And I'm going to ask you to do just a little bit of a spoiler, because I got the preview of your October article for the Bishop's Bulletin, the Diocese of Sioux Falls, in which you write a little bit about this topic, and you share a really just kind of touching story. Do you mind just sharing a little bit about kind of the experience you had and just some of your general concerns?
Yeah. So like I said, I have a handsome hunk of a humanity husband named Matt and 3 little girls. And one of our favorite things to do is go for, weekend bike rides. And so a few weeks ago, we loaded up on a Sunday afternoon to go for a bike ride. We were going to jump on these beautiful bike trails that go through Sioux Falls and go over to a park. And we got to the park, and there were 2 kind of young adults, young teenagers, somewhere in between, laying out on a picnic table in this park with the smell of marijuana in the air. And it was very obvious, just from as we got off our bikes and were loading out, or, the girls were going over to play in the park, it was very obvious that clearly they were stoned, they were high, and I was struck by the fact that they didn't acknowledge us. There was literally no awareness, I think, that we were even there, or that at least there was no indication that they were aware that we were there. And it really, the whole time I just kept on, watching them out of the corner of my eye, and there was just this real sadness. And my oldest daughter, who's 5, said, "Mommy, are they sleeping?" And she was confused because their eyes were open, right? So they were looking straight up at the sky. She knew that she knew that they weren't sleeping.
Yes.
But I could tell she was trying to figure out what's wrong with them. Something is not right. And I think there was honestly a worry in her. There was some fear in her. Like, are they okay? Like, are they dead? And so we played for a little bit, had all the snacks, because you're a mom and you have 3 little kids, you bring snacks wherever you go. So we ate all the snacks. And on our way back home, as we were riding our bikes, I just kept on thinking through this question, like, are they sleeping? Are they sleeping? And it impacted me so much that it really drew me to prayer. Like it was far deeper than just a, hey, are they awake or not kind of question. It really, it permeated somewhere in my heart. And so I continue to think, like, are they sleeping? And I share in this article that I wrote, this grief that I started to feel, that there's 2 young 18, 19-year-old kids that should be moving their able bodies, or playing Frisbee, or engaged in conversation, or thinking about the future, or reading something, or listening to something, or even just contemplating, like in an engaged sort of way. And there was none of that.
Yeah.
There was just this void. And it's really difficult to describe, but if you ever have just that kind of intuition, like that spiritual intuition, like something is not right here, that was kind of my experience of it. And to be totally honest, I would say up until the last 6 months or so, the marijuana thing was kind of a non-issue for me. Like I wasn't real passionate about it. I didn't have strong opinions. There was kind of this, I knew what are the potheads? Is that what the kids are calling them these days? I knew potheads in high school, but really had no feelings about it.
Yeah.
It was like, well, if that's what they want to do, that's not for me, but whatever, if that's what they want to do. And then more recently started, as it's become more and more popular, and as South Dakota, has been wrestling with the potential legalization and that kind of thing, I was like, I got to understand this a little bit more. And then God would give me this experience in the park that really kind of confirmed what had already started in my own heart, in this recognition that I don't know that this is this isn't good for the human person.
Yeah.
This isn't human flourishing. This isn't what flourishing looks like. And obviously I'm really interested in human flourishing.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at in my own journey of just wrestling with the topic and, yeah, and having this really profound experience that kind of touched me in a unique way a couple weeks ago with my family, and really left me in a, I don't want this for my kids. I don't want this for my girls. I don't want this confusion. I want them to be 18 and at a park and with a friend and talking and engaged and present to the world around them. I don't want them to be void. I don't want them to be void.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of where it started for me.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So Emily, when you think specifically about this proposal on the November ballot to legalize recreational use of marijuana, what do you see, I guess, kind of concretely speaking, as the threats that poses to South Dakota in terms of, as you put it, human flourishing? What are the different ways that you see that it potentially undermines human flourishing?
Yeah. So like I shared, a key pillar of the Lourdes Center is counseling. And I'm always a little hesitant to use the word mental health counseling because I think that has almost too narrow of a connotation. We see individuals that are dealing with a myriad of things, life transitions, children who are struggling. We see a lot of parents whose children are going through a myriad of difficulties, and the parents are trying to navigate this or whatever. So I just want to put that disclaimer out first, that when we talk about mental health, we're not just talking about maybe chronic, big diagnoses. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, however, as a counseling agency, one of the things that we see a lot of is the impact of addiction. And so we recognize, and this is like pretty obvious, you don't have to have a degree in psychology or something to recognize that addiction is not good for the human person. It robs the human person of freedom. The addiction rate for people who utilize marijuana is really high. I think, gosh, you had Luke, I can't think of his last name.
Neferatos.
Yes, and he actually said that it changed in the last 10 years. It used to be like 1 in 10. Now it's 1 in 3 regular users of modern day marijuana are subject to addiction or are likely to become addicted. And we also see that it provides a major gateway for other drugs. Most people don't try meth or cocaine or some of those other really hard drugs without first trying marijuana, let alone, cigarettes and some of those things. So that's one threat that I see. And then further with marijuana, some really fascinating studies have come out, and you can look at this on like the SAMHSA website, which is what? Substance Abuse
and Mental Health Services Administration, I think.
Thank you.
Ding, ding, ding.
It's a mouthful.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah, we just call it SAMHSA because I can never remember what it actually stands for. But they have put out some really interesting research about the potential effects of marijuana on brain development and long-term effects on the brain, and like the rates of psychosis or schizophrenia really are much higher for people who are regular users of modern day marijuana. And I keep on using that modern day marijuana because I think it's also worth noting that the substance itself has changed in the last decade. The phrase like it's not your grandpa's marijuana, or it's not your not your uncle's marijuana. That's the shift that's really happened, where the potency of marijuana has drastically increased. That and yet while the usership is rising, so the percentage of people that are using is rising, the potency has been rising, the perceived harm or potential harm has been going down. It's been decreasing. People now think that marijuana, they don't think it's problematic. They don't think that it's dangerous. They don't think that it has potential for, the perceived harm has been going down. So for all of those reasons, I think that really proposes some major harm to society, to to young people, especially, who are, I think, our particular target, even just in how it's worded, recreational, like it's for fun, it's easy, it's outdoorsy, it's, they've really done a beautiful job marketing it, unfortunately. But there's just this idea of what it looks like. And yet the perceived harm or the communication of the dangers, I think, have been sorely undermined.
Emily, how do you think through, because let's say there's somebody who's like, yeah, it's you're smoking a substance. Of course, there's going to be some risk or harm, but shouldn't grownups just be able to do what they want? How do you wrestle through that position with somebody who's saying, well, can't we just live and let live? This doesn't affect other people, right?
Yep, right.
How do you approach that?
Well, I think that's where I was for a long time. I shared, like, even up until 6 months ago, there was a bit of this, like, well, there's not really that much harm. However, if you look at any law ever written in the United States of America, why do we have laws? Well, it's for the common good. It's actually for the protection of people, to create a society in which people can flourish, to offer some level of boundary to what is good for the person and what is not good for the person. It's why cigarettes became highly regulated. You have to be 18 to purchase a pack of cigarettes. There's regulations around these things. I think one of the critical problems that I see with marijuana, and why there's actually, like, policy that's needed around it, is because there's not a really effective way to determine how much marijuana is in somebody's system.
So true.
So if you get pulled over after a wedding and you were drinking too much, you're going to get breathalyzed. And if you're over a certain amount, the cop is going to say, I'm sorry, that you are actually a danger to society driving in this condition.
Right.
You cannot do that for the good of society. One of the great problems in marijuana usage is we don't have a way to regulate that. We don't have a way to tell how much is in someone's system, and it slows all of those reactionary things to a degree that this is not safe for you to be on the road. So that's just one example. But that's what policy does. And don't get me wrong, like, there's a balance to be had there, right? We don't want to regulate everything to the point of that robs freedom. But policy done well, I think, and this is more your element than mine, but I think policy done well creates a society in which people are safe to flourish, or that they are safe and that they can flourish.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
It does. Well put.
So that's kind of my gut reaction to it. And oftentimes moral perceptions follow the legal realities. So Roe Wade was set in 1973. It changed public perception.
Yeah.
There's no way that the number of people that today think abortion is completely a right or whatever, it was not that high when Roe Wade was established in 1973.
Right.
72, 73.
73.
So there's just a reality that this does follow. Or cigarettes, they became legal, and then you had this huge skyrocket of people that were smoking cigarettes, and then there was this massive pushback that says, like, hey, actually you're going to die of cancer. And now we have commercials all over TV that say don't smoke, and while you're pregnant, don't smoke. These marketing campaigns, and now a lot of people think that cigarette smoking is a terrible thing. You shouldn't do it. You're going to die, sort of thing. Yeah. So we follow, a lot of times, the moral perceptions, I think, follow legal realities.
Yeah. Another great example, because I mean, what you're saying essentially is the law is a teacher. And I love how you just articulate balance, because we do want to have balance in everything. You never want the law to be a cudgel with people. But we can think about something like texting and driving.
Yeah.
How actually just society-wide, people were texting and driving a lot. And we changed the laws, and people came along because it's backed up by reason, actually. It's like a very reasonable law that we can all kind of see, like, oh yeah, there's a harm that's baked into this. The law should do this, and it's good for everybody.
That's a way better example. Yeah, no, that's true. It's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it shifts the perception, and it actually becomes the educator in many ways.
Right.
It becomes the very place in which people start to utilize their reason and tap into it.
Yeah. Well, if you're just joining us, we are talking with Emily Leedom, the executive director of the Lourdes Center in the Diocese of Sioux Falls. And we're talking about the initiated measure 27 on this November's ballot to legalize recreational marijuana. in the state of South Dakota. And, I want to circle back, Emily, to something you were talking about earlier, which is the increased potency of today's marijuana, because this is something where, you kind of confessed how marijuana wasn't all that important of an issue to you as recently as, a year ago. And I thought that I knew a lot about marijuana, but I honestly did not know until just a few months ago this issue of the increased potency. And you mentioned the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. This is the statement that they have issued regarding the increased potency of marijuana. So the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana is called THC. And this is what SAMHSA says. They say, over the past few decades, the amount of THC in marijuana has steadily climbed. Today's marijuana has 3 times the concentration of THC compared to 25 years ago. The higher the THC amount, the stronger the effects on the brain, likely contributing to increased rates of marijuana-related emergency room visits. End of quote. And, I just have to say that this was astounding to me. And I guess I just wanted to get your thoughts about whether part of what we're battling against when we look at this ballot measure is that people's perceptions of marijuana are formed based upon they smoked a joint in college 25 years ago and it was no big deal. And so therefore they don't take the issue all that seriously. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
I think that's spot on. And it also strikes me that perhaps with the increase in legalization of medical marijuana, the perception is also changing.
Yeah.
So, like now we are advertising and marketing the benefits of what's the other ingredient? CBD. Thank you. So we're actively promoting the health benefits, quote unquote, of CBD for muscle tension, for headaches, for ongoing things, and even just increasing the marketing of THC. And there are absolutely drugs that are approved by the FDA that have marijuana in them, that have proven, benefits and that kind of thing. So I think part of what's happening is as that roller coaster has left the station, if you will, I think we're kind of starting to just lump recreational marijuana into it.
Yeah.
But there's actually, in my opinion, a huge void of research that's been done on many of the diseases that we're prescribing medical marijuana for. Does that make sense? It does. There's a handful of them that the FDA said, yep, we're seeing this, but there's a whole lot of them that we're saying, okay, this has no impact on this disease, and yet I think because there's some big pharma money behind it, there's still this massive push that medical marijuana is going to solve all pain issues.
Yeah.
And so with that, I think then we're kind of saying, well, if a doctor will prescribe it, it's not dangerous.
Yeah.
It's not whatever, but there's no dosage, recommendations. There's very limited research on it.
Yeah.
So I think that just is, for me, kind of a place to cause pause. But I do think, Michael, to your question about the perception and how it's just shifted, I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. I was visiting Michael with a Catholic. I found out he was Catholic, but he was a pain physician, a specialist in pain treatment out in Rapid City. And I bumped into him in the Capitol one day. He was up there as the doctor for the day. They do this program. Anyhow, I asked him flat out, I said, sorry to wade into politics here, but can I ask you, what do you think of medical marijuana for pain treatment? He says, I absolutely will not prescribe it for my patients. Not a million years.
What was his reason?
It's just, it's the Wild West. You don't know what you're getting for dosage. It's not cleared through the FDA. There are legitimate medications. I don't want to get too far afield into medical.
Yeah.
Because I know there are people out there who swear up and down that it really helps them, but I think the reason you raise this, Emily, are people conflating the two and seeing some of the positive. There's some people who say this really helps them. And does this create this sort of positive association with commercial adult use? so-called recreational. One bright spot that I think maybe is important to point out is we just got some polling data back last week for the state of South Dakota, and we're actually looking more, I don't want to say looking good, but better than expected. 54% of South Dakotans are saying they're going to vote no on IM 27. So maybe the advocates of marijuana, when they put both medical and recreational on the ballot together a couple of years ago, they got some benefit from people that were kind of confused, or maybe like, hey, I think I need to vote for this other one to get recreational, and people are clear on it now. They just wanted medical, and they're not okay with recreational. So that's good.
Yeah. And I also wonder, to some extent, whether news is starting to percolate about the effects of legalizing recreational marijuana in some of the other states like Colorado and Washington and California. And I think that there is a growing awareness that this has not been entirely a happy experience. We've got data from Colorado showing increases in fatalities, highway fatalities associated with drivers who are under the influence of marijuana. So certainly a lot of things that we need to be worried about, that might happen in South Dakota if this comes to pass. So one of the things that I've stumbled across, Emily, when I was researching this topic was some wonderful quote from Pope John Paul II, saying, "There is need to recognize that there is a link between the lethal sickness caused by the abuse of drugs and the sickness of the spirit that leads the person to escape from oneself and seek deceptive satisfactions in avoiding reality, to the point of canceling completely the meaning of one's existence." And it just seems that there's an obvious link between people using marijuana to in effect avoid unpleasant realities, and that part of what we need to do is to help people choose healthier ways of dealing with reality. And I wanted to just pick your brain a little bit about some concrete examples of healthier ways that we can teach people to deal with reality. And I need to say at this point, this is totally unfair to our listeners in the radio audience, but we are coming up against our time for the radio portion of our broadcast, but we're going to be continuing the conversation with Emily. So if you want to hear the answer that I just asked to Emily, just visit our website, sdcatholicconference.org, and you can listen to the full unabridged version of our podcast. So for our radio listeners, until next time, live well. All right, and continuing on for our podcast listeners, you're the lucky few who get to listen to Emily's answer to that difficult question I posed.
Michael Pauley, you are a podcast pro, brother.
Pro.
Well done. Well done.
I did the little teaser there to get people to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, I want to listen to the rest of it, and here I am. Yeah, that was so good, Michael. And I love that quote from John Paul II. And as you were reading it, I was like, this is why John Paul II changed my life. This is why, he just spoke to the human heart in such a profound way. I think about this a lot. We all have things that we cope with. We all have, for me, sometimes it's scrolling Pinterest or Instagram or whatever, or for some people it's food, or for some people it's shopping, or for some people it's smoking, or for some people it's exercising too much. We all have ways that we work to cope with reality. That's part of kind of the fallen humanity, where we don't just always run directly to the Lord maybe when we should, right? And marijuana is so boring to me in that regard, because it just seems like another uncreative thing on the list of things that we utilize to cope with reality, especially because of marijuana's the way that it affects the brain, the kind of calming, disengaging effect that it has on the brain. I think it's another way that people cope with reality, with their own discomfort. Whereas we're really made for community. We're made for communion. We're obviously made for the Lord, but we're also made to respond to the creation that He's put around us, to really engage in the world. I shared at the beginning that example of showing up at the park and these two guys laid out on a picnic table, completely disengaged. We're not made to be disengaged when we're at a park and the cutest little girls ever are sliding with glee down the slide or swinging or whatever. Like we're meant to notice that to a certain extent. We're made to engage in the world. And so I think, the ways in which, we find people cope in a way that brings about flourishing, in a way that actually brings about like a restored level of peace or whatever in place of where there might have been anxiety before, is things like exercise, things like friendship, things like the outdoors. We actually know that the outdoors, when we can be present to the outdoors, have a very powerful. There's a book that I want to read, Your Brain on Nature. I haven't read it yet, but I would love to read it because it does. We know that nature has a profound effect on us. Prayer, obviously, like that's the undercurrent of it all. I mean, I could point to a million things: painting, creative, reading, whatever.
Okay, and Michael, I know you asked the question of Emily, but I want to jump in here because as Emily's talking about sort of being open to reality or being closed off to reality, I'm reminded of this conversation that we had in this program with Michael Naughton a few months ago, and we were talking about leisure. And leisure, according to our working definition, came from Joseph Pieper. It's this capacity of the soul to perceive reality as it is. So leisure activities are those things that help us encounter reality rather than those things which shut us off from it. So I mean, when I hear you talk about just sort of being outside in nature, true children's play, it's like, yes, yes, yes. These are really wonderful things.
And there's a reason he called it the art of leisure. You know, Pieper's book, The Art of Leisure. It's because it actually takes a little bit of practice and cultivation to be able to do it well, because our brains, I think, are so often in this productive mode that our default is like, oh, I'm tired, I'm going to sit on the couch and I'm going to scroll. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's not your default. But for some people that I don't know, it might be their default. But
these things are
they're addictive. Yeah, and the default is to go to where the addiction is easiest and most accessible. Right. And so I think that's one of the great dangers in some of these addictive substances like marijuana, which is obviously very addictive. It's just one more thing that's like the easy kind of the easy answer to escape the discomfort that we feel. And I've really, like, this is going to be vulnerable, but there have been moments where I will get off of a difficult phone conversation. I will leave a difficult meeting. I will sit down at the end of a really rough bedtime. Bedtimes are probably super smooth in your house, but sometimes they're not so smooth in my house. And my temptation is to go to the most addictive thing. It's to scroll or whatever. And so I think it takes actually like a level of effort and creativity to act differently. Yeah. And I find there's a very clear difference when I sit down and scroll at the end of a really rough bedtime, and when my husband and I say, meet you on the porch with a cup of tea, let's read a book together, or let's I don't know, even just like rehash our day or whatever. Like there's a palpable difference in the restorative nature of those things to my spirit, which is maybe tired or run down or whatever. So we're made for things that bring us life. We're made for things that bring us connection. And I think marijuana doesn't seem to be answering that. It doesn't seem to be bringing about prolonged restorative peace, presence, community, authentic friendship. We're just not seeing that happen.
Well put. So, Emily, I want to dive into a topic that often comes up in the debate over marijuana. And it kind of goes like this. People will listen to you recount the harms, that marijuana causes to individuals in society, but then they'll say, but we see the same things with alcohol, and, alcohol is legal. So why should marijuana be treated any differently from alcohol? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Imagine walking into a bar of people that have been drinking great wine all night long. What's it sound like?
Loud
It's
and
loud.
lots of conversations.
Yes, it's loud, it's conversational, people are dancing, people are moving. It actually brings one, for the most part, for most people, it brings one out of yourself. Imagine walking into a bar where people have been smoking marijuana for the last 6 hours. What's it sound like?
Quiet.
Very quiet. It's disengaged. It's and I want to be careful here because I'm not advocating for like over drinking or anything like that. But the effects of wine on the human person as opposed to the effects of marijuana on the human person are radically different. And I think the difference that needs to be noted is that wine actually has a way of cultivating friendship, of cultivating relationship, of bringing one out of oneself. I mean, it's why like G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis and whoever else was in the posse.
The Inklings.
What do you call them?
The Inklings.
The Inklings. I've never heard that. That's their nickname.
Isn't that? No. Well,
I believe you.
we could. That's a different show.
Okay, totally believe you. But there's a reason that they met in a pub.
Right.
And drank beer and whatever, or the great philosophers would pour a glass of wine, and like it actually contributes to connectivity and whatever in moderation, obviously, in a way that marijuana is not doing for the human person.
Yeah,
that'd be my response.
Yeah, and then there's actually this interesting quote that this comes from Pope St. John Paul II when he was giving an address speaking to substance abuse in general. And so the context of his remarks is he was speaking out against both drugs and alcohol. But in his speech, he says, and I quote, there is certainly a clear difference between resorting to drugs and turning to alcohol, whereas the moderate use of alcohol as a drink does not in fact clash with moral prohibitions, and only abuse is to be condemned. Taking drugs is, on the contrary, always illicit because it involves an unjustified and irrational renunciation of thinking, willing, and acting as free persons, close quote. And I think that what he's pointing to there is that although there certainly is a very real problem with alcoholism and substance abuse, and
Absolutely.
I doubt there's any. I bet between the three of us having this conversation, we can all think of people that we have known in our lives who have struggled with that addiction, and yet we also know that the vast majority of people can imbibe alcohol responsibly and in a way that doesn't take away your faculties, take away your ability to reason. So it's not a renunciation of your reason to moderately drink. So, yeah.
What would you say to that, Chris?
I pose the question, why do people smoke marijuana? And I think the answer is to get high. Is that true? I think that's why it's done, and I think that's the result of doing it. Is one gets high. And to get high is to renounce,
which brings about relaxation or whatever.
And there are all these effects, right? Yeah. But along with getting high is a renunciation of one's reason, and our reason is one of the ways in which we are, made in God's image, and it's part of our dignity as human beings. It's for the same reason that getting drunk is gravely wrong. It's a deliberate renunciation of our reason, this high human faculty that is beautiful. It's without it, we aren't free, right? It's how we exercise our free will. So it's different in that way, insofar as that's why people smoke marijuana, is to get high. And we could say too, this is actually, I can't remember what we were talking about, but this has come up on the show in the past with Dr. Bergwald, where even so, I think we all know, drinking to get drunk it's grave matter. Shouldn't do it. Separates us from God. But even drinking to get tipsy, there are moral theologians who make the case that that's a venial sin. So yeah, there's something good and the scriptures are full of these examples of sort of how a glass of wine sort of greases the wheels of human festivity. It's in the Psalms. Wine to cheer their hearts and oil to make their faces shine. Like it can very legitimately be bound up in cheerfulness and festivity celebration. But we're getting into really dangerous territory when we enter that realm in which we're sort of cutting ourselves off from our human reason at the basis of our freedom.
And as you're talking about that, the other thought that comes to my mind is if you ask somebody, why do you drink wine? A lot of times they'll say, actually, I love the taste of wine. I love the smell of wine. Like it actually engages the pleasure senses for people. Or like really good, why do we have all these craft breweries?
Yeah.
It's because people really like particular types of craft beer. People aren't smoking marijuana because they really like the smell of it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It smells terrible. There's actually like a human pleasure sense that that we engage in wine or beer or good bourbon or whatever that's not present with marijuana. The effect is essentially the only driver for the usage of marijuana, where I think that's very different for beer and alcohol, or beer, wine, bourbon. Choose your drink.
Right.
You know, that there's actually an art to the creation of the thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Emily, I wanted to segue a little bit into the politics behind this initiative that's going to be on the ballot. Whether it wins or loses is in large part going to be a function of public opinion. And as Chris mentioned earlier, we did see a poll that came out very recently showing, at least at the present time, a majority of South Dakotans seem disinclined to vote on that. But that could change because we're early in the campaign season, and there will be a lot of money spent trying to convince people that this is a harmless thing to legalize marijuana. So one of the things that I was really struck by as I researched this topic is that the Gallup organization has been tracking public opinion on marijuana legalization for many years, and it's kind of inched up higher and higher over the years. And last year, their poll put the number at a record high of 68% of Americans supporting legalization of marijuana. And again, as Chris pointed out, this is not South Dakota. The most recent poll we have for South Dakota puts the number, thankfully, at 44%. So, but at least nationally, Gallup is claiming 68% support for legalization. But what's interesting is just within the last 2 weeks, they came out with a different poll that asked a question about marijuana that was moving away from legalization. And instead, what they said is, what effect do you think the use of marijuana has on society? And when they framed the question that way, it basically ended up being a close split, with 50% saying marijuana has a negative effect on society and 49% saying it has a positive effect. And so, that left me scratching my head a little bit, saying, okay, well, if there's 50% of the people out there who think that marijuana has a negative effect on society, but 68% say they support legalization, the only way those numbers can be reconciled is that you've got a substantial portion of people supporting legalization who nevertheless believe that this is actually going to be harmful to society if we do it. And I guess I just, wanted to get your thoughts on what kind of explains that cognitive dissonance, where some people could be in favor of legalization, even knowing that it's going to be harmful to society.
Mm-hmm. How far apart were those two surveys, did you say? Were they a couple of years apart?
Well, the one that showed 68% support was in 2021, and I forget I think it was sometime in the fall of 2021, and this most recent one was just within the last couple of weeks.
Okay, yeah, so really not far apart at all.
Not too far apart. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I have to think that there's a whole lot of people that are making big money on it. And that maybe sounds really harsh, but what is it? The two main companies are Marlboro. How do you say that? Marlboro. The cigarette Marlboro. I can't even say it.
Marlboro.
The cigarette guy. He is now like in cahoots with the main marijuana guy, and the cigarette guy has to know that cigarettes are not good for the human person. But boy, he has made a whole lot of money. I say he, it might be she, maybe it's like a group of people. I don't even know. But the only way that I can really reconcile that is that there's really a lot of money to be had. And even for farmers of marijuana or of hemp or whatever, there's a profit to be had. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. Unfortunately, there's a reality that a lot of people will support things if there's a profit and to minimize the risk to the human person. And we see that in a myriad of things. But that'd be my best guess of what's going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting, puzzle. And, what I guess my thought was, I think about scripture, and that line, am I my brother's keeper? And I wonder if we aren't seeing a substantial amount of the population that, looks at marijuana and says, yeah, society would not be better off if this was more widely used, but they just don't feel uh, kind of the personal sense of responsibility, to look out for the common good. I'm not suggesting that most people are thinking this way, but I think that perhaps that's what we're seeing, is that there's at least a fraction there of those people who are just kind of shrugging their shoulders and saying, well, I'm not going to use it, and so it's not going to affect me, and so therefore, I just don't really care, what other people are going to do. It's you do you, and I do
Sure,
me, that kind
sure.
of mentality. So
There's
yeah.
a comedian that on Instagram for a while was playing this game with his followers, and he would post a picture of a sign, and his followers had to guess, is it a church or is it a dispensary? And and I mean, he had like hundreds of examples of these signs, and church dispensary, people would vote, and then he would post the answer of what it was. And I bring that up because all of these dispensaries and these evangelical churches, they have the same names. I mean, and you would literally see a New Life church next to a sign that said New Life Dispensary. But it was interesting to me because the promise that was being made, I felt like in how these dispensaries were being named and were being titled, is that there's life to be found here. Like there was a spiritual component, and that's the reason that they were all the same names as the churches. There was a spiritual component of what it was promising,
Yes.
that I think is concerning. And that's when I was talking earlier about just the marketing effort and the way in which the bigwigs behind the push on the legalization of recreational marijuana are moving. It's in that direction. It's in that regard. They're not going to name it. Well, though there was some soaring heights and that sort of thing. But I don't know. There's something about that to me that was really telling in regard to how are they trying to promote and pass this by in society, and that was how it's like the churches and the dispensaries have the same name.
Man, it's just like,
Wow.
can't we just be honest? We just want God.
Yeah. And we'll
Wow.
look at a whole lot of different places for it. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Wow. Well, we are almost at the end of our time, but just, before we wind things up, Emily or Chris, any final thoughts on this issue?
Just to be clear, because I don't think we've said it yet, vote no on IM27.
I was just going to say, are we voting yes or no?
Vote no on IM27. Early voting starts, I think, September 23rd, so right around the corner. Of course, Election Day is November 8th, but vote no, IM27.
And I think
All
the other
right.
thing that I would say really briefly, Michael, is the importance of talking to your people about this. Talk
Yes.
to your friends, talk to the people in your sphere of influence, because I think if it's not really thought about, it seems a bit like, okay,
Yeah.
sure, why not? But when proposed, or when I was proposed with the actual data and facts about how some of this is playing out in people's lives, it really gave me pause and actually shifted kind of an indifference in me to now being on a podcast saying, hey, I don't think this is good for the human person. So I would just say encourage people to talk to their family, talk to their friends about it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And, the South Dakota Catholic Conference will be putting out some additional resources for parishes and just concerned Catholics to help share with their friends and neighbors and coworkers to help educate them about this initiative. And I also plan to devote at least 2 more episodes of this podcast to exploring different angles of marijuana legalization, perhaps from a medical perspective. Maybe I'm hoping to have somebody on, who's got expertise in education to talk about the negative effects of marijuana, specifically in the context of young people and their educational outcomes. And so we're going to continue the efforts here to educate people as best they can, and then, as Chris said, in case anybody's confused about where we stand, vote no on Measure 27. So with that, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening, and until next time, live well.